Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku's quirk let him speak to the future, but not change it. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world, for a 6-year-old Izuku Midoriya, was divided into two simple categories, things that were amazing, and things that were not. All Might was amazing. Katsuki Bakugo's quirk was amazing. The limited edition Silver Age All Might action figure was so amazing it transcended the word entirely. His own quirk was not. It had manifested 6 months ago, not with a bang or a flash, but with a whimper. He'd been watching television, a documentary about deep-sea fish, when a sudden, inexplicable wave of panic had washed over him. It was a cold, suffocating feeling, like being plunged into icy water. He'd heard a faint, gurgling gasp in his mind and felt a phantom pressure in his chest. He'd started crying, unable to explain the terror that gripped him. 10 minutes later, a news bulletin interrupted the program. A local fisherman had been swept overboard by a rogue wave. His empty boat had just been found. His mother, Inko, had held him tight, her face a mask of worried confusion. A trip to the quirk specialist had yielded a diagnosis as vague as the quirk itself. Precognitive sensory echo, the doctor had called it, a technical, sterile term for a deeply unsettling phenomenon. Izuku experienced fragmented sensory information, a sound, a smell, an emotion, from a future event. There was no control, no context, just a sudden, jarring glimpse of what was to come. Izuku just called it the bad feelings. Today, the bad feelings were quiet, a dormant beast in the back of his mind. The sun was a brilliant, warm weight on his shoulders, and the air in the neighborhood park smelled of freshly cut grass and summer dust. The only sound that mattered was the explosive pop-crackle-boom that echoed from the sandbox. "See that, you extras?" Katsuki Bakugo, his palms smoking like miniature engines, grinned with the feral confidence only a child with a powerful quirk could possess. He just blasted a sandcastle into a glassy crater. That's what a real hero's quirk looks like. His two followers, Tsubasa with his burgeoning red wings and another boy with extendable fingers, cheered dutifully. Izuku watched from a safe distance, clutching his own All Might figure, a silent observer as always. He admired Kaken. He truly did. Kaken was strong, confident, and his quirk was undeniably amazing. Izuku yearned for that same certainty, that same power to do something. "What about you, Deku?" Bakugo's sharp red eyes fixed on him. The nickname, a cruel twist of his name meaning useless, still stung every time. "Had any more of your useless whispers today? Gonna cry because a bird is gonna poop on the slide?" Tsubasa snickered. "Yeah, Deku. Predict something useful for once." Izuku's face burned. It's not useless," he stammered, his voice barely a squeak. It tells me things. I can help people." He didn't know if that was true. So far, his quirk had only made him a vessel for second-hand anxiety. He'd felt the sharp sting of a scraped knee 5 minutes before it happened to a girl on the swings. He tasted the bitter, soapy flavor of a dropped ice cream cone moments before a toddler's treat met its tragic end on the pavement. He tried to warn them, both times, but his panicked, vague shouts, "Watch out! Be careful!" were either ignored or misunderstood. He was just a weird, crying kid. "Oh yeah?" Bakugo swaggered over, hands in his pockets. The smell of nitroglycerin, sweet and sharp, clung to him like cologne. "Prove it." "What's gonna happen next?" Izuku's heart hammered against his ribs. He wanted to. More than anything, he wanted to prove them all wrong. He wanted his quirk to roar, not whisper. He closed his eyes, concentrating with all his might, trying to force a bad feeling, a glimpse of the future that he could actually stop. "Please, please, please," and then it came. It wasn't a roar. It was a flicker. A sudden, sharp image flashed behind his eyes, the gnarled brown root of the old oak tree near the path. With it came a brief, phantom jolt of pain in his ankle and the wet, earthy smell of soil. It was faint, but it was there. He looked over and saw an elderly woman walking slowly down the path, her eyes on the flowers lining the walkway. She was heading right for the root. "That lady!" Izuku pointed, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. She's going to trip. On the route, Bakugo snorted, unimpressed. Whatever, Deku. She's looking where she's going. No, she isn't. We have to warn her. Izuku took a step forward, but Bakugo blocked his path. And say what? My useless Quirk says you're clumsy? She'll think you're a freak. The words hit their mark, freezing Izuku in place. He was a freak. That's what they all thought. He hesitated, his small body torn between the urge to act and the paralyzing fear of ridicule. The moment of indecision was all it took. The old woman's foot caught on the exposed root. She let out a surprised cry, stumbling forward and catching herself on the park bench just in time. She hadn't fallen, but she dropped her grocery bag. A carton of eggs cracked open on the pavement, a sad yellow splatter. Bakugo burst out laughing. It was a harsh, cruel sound. See? Useless. You knew it was gonna happen, and you just stood there and watched. You didn't do anything. It's the useless whisper Quirk. All it does is tell you bad stuff is coming so you can cry about it first. The laughter of the other boys joined in, a chorus of mockery that felt like physical blows. Izuku's eyes welled with hot, shameful tears. Kaken was right. He had known. And he had done nothing. The future had happened anyway, and all his knowledge had amounted to was a front-row seat to a minor, mundane accident. The shame was a thick, syrupy thing in his throat. I am not useless, he whispered to the ground, the words tasting like ash. Let's get out of here, Bakugo said, already bored. This park is lame. I know a better place. He glanced over his shoulder, a smirk playing on his lips. The new construction site down by the river. Way more fun stuff to blow up there, the other boys cheered. A construction site. It sounded dangerous and exciting. It sounded like a place where a powerful Quirk would be amazing. Izuku, desperate to escape the scene of his latest failure and pathetically eager to still be included, wiped his tears on his sleeve and trailed behind them, a silent, miserable shadow. The construction site was a skeleton of a future building, a maze of concrete foundations, skeletal steel beams, and neatly stacked piles of raw materials. It was a playground of potential hazards, which to a group of 6-year-old boys, translated to a universe of adventure. The air smelled of damp earth, rust, and the sharp tang of cut lumber. Bakugo was in his element, using small, controlled pops from his palms to send pebbles skittering across the concrete floor. Tsubasa scrambled up a low pile of drywall, spreading his wings and gliding the few feet back down. It was a display of nascent power, of boys testing the shape of the men they might become. Izuku felt smaller than ever. His Quirk had no place here. There was nothing to whisper about, no minor tumbles to predict. He wandered away from the others, his all-might figure a cold, plastic weight in his hand. He ran his fingers over the hero's sculpted smile, a beacon of absolute confidence. All Might wouldn't just stand by, All Might would act. He would save everyone, every time. He wouldn't be afraid of what people thought. He would just do. Maybe my Quirk is like All Might's power, a desperate little voice reasoned in his head. Maybe I just don't know how to use it right. Maybe I need to be stronger. His eyes fell on a pile of discarded materials near the edge of the site. It was a jumble of scrap metal, splintered wood, and short lengths of rebar. Lying atop the pile was a thick, rusty iron pipe, about as long as his arm. It looked heavy. It looked strong. A foolish, childish idea began to form. Kaken was strong because his Quirk made him strong. Maybe Izuku needed to show he was strong, too. If he could lift that pipe, if he could show them he wasn't just a crybaby, maybe they would see him differently. Maybe his Quirk would see him differently, too, and give him something important, something heroic. He walked over to the pile, his sneakers crunching on the gravel. The pipe was even bigger up close, its surface a flaking crust of orange-brown rust. It was probably too heavy. He'd probably fail, and Kaken would laugh again. The thought made his stomach clench. But the alternative, doing nothing, being nothing, was worse. He took a deep breath, channeling all his desperate admiration for All Might. For strength. For heroism. He reached out with both hands and wrapped his small fingers around the rough, cold metal. The moment his skin made contact, the world dissolved. It wasn't a flicker this time. It was an apocalypse. The vibrant colors of the construction site bleached into a washed-out, sickening gray. The sounds of Bakugo's explosions and the distant traffic muted into a dull, underwater hum. All of his senses were hijacked, ripped away from his body and plunged into a nightmare that was not his own. First, the sound. A scream. It wasn't a stranger's scream. It was the most familiar sound in his world, twisted into a shriek of pure agony. Izuku! His mother's voice. Then, the smell. Not rust and dirt, but the acrid, choking scent of burning oil and scorched food. It was the smell of the kitchen, but horribly wrong. A smell of disaster. Then, the feeling. A searing, unbearable pain erupted on his right arm. It wasn't a phantom jolt. It was a visceral, all-consuming fire. It felt hot and wet, like his skin was melting, blistering, peeling away from the muscle. He could feel the shock of it, the way the agony radiated up to his shoulder and down to his fingertips. He could feel the frantic, useless instinct to pull away from a pain that was already branded onto him. He saw a fragmented image, the blue and white checkered pattern of their kitchen floor, seen from a low angle. A splash of clear, shimmering liquid. A red, blistering hand, his mother's hand, clutching an arm that was rapidly turning an angry, inflamed crimson. And beneath it all, an overwhelming wave of emotion, pure, unadulterated panic. His mother's panic. Her pain, her fear, her shock, all pouring into him like a toxic flood. He let go of the pipe. The world slammed back into place. The colors were saturated, the sounds deafeningly loud. He fell backward, landing hard on the gravel, his chest heaving. The phantom pain on his arm vanished, but a ghostly, tingling memory of it remained. His own arm was fine, covered by his green t-shirt sleeve, but the echo of the burn was so real he could almost see it. He knew, with a certainty that was as absolute and terrifying as death, what he had just witnessed. His mother was going to burn herself. Badly? In the kitchen, and she had screamed his name. Why would she scream my name? The question was a spark in the kindling of his panic. The echoes were never about him. They were always about other people. Why was he involved? Did he do something? It didn't matter. He had to stop it. This wasn't a scraped knee or a dropped ice cream. This was his mom. This was real. This was his chance. His quirk had finally given him something important. What's wrong, Deku? Bakugo's voice cut through his terror. He and the others were staring at him, their expressions a mixture of annoyance and curiosity. You look like you saw a ghost. My mom, Izuku gasped, scrambling to his feet. Something's going to happen to my mom. In the kitchen, Bakugo rolled his eyes. Here we go again. Your mom probably just burned the toast, crybaby. No! It's bad, Kaken. It's really bad. The memory of the scream, of the pain, was so vivid it threatened to swallow him whole. There was no time to explain, no time to argue. He had to go. Now, he turned and ran. He didn't say goodbye, didn't look back. He just ran, his short legs pumping as fast as they could, fueled by a terror so profound it felt like a physical force pushing him from behind. He burst out of the construction site and onto the street, a small, green-haired blur of pure panic. The 2 blocks to his apartment building had never seemed so long. Every step was a battle against the future he'd seen. The phantom pain on his arm flared with every pump of his arms, a ghostly metronome ticking down to disaster. I can stop it. I can stop it, he chanted in his head, the words a desperate mantra. I'll get there, and I'll tell her to be careful. I'll make her turn off the stove. I'll stand between her and the pot. I'm fast. I can get there. I can be a hero. He imagined the scene. He would burst in, a valiant, pint-sized savior. His mom would look surprised, and he would explain everything. She would hug him, praise him for his wonderful, heroic quirk, and the terrible future would simply dissolve, defeated by his warning. He would finally prove it. He would prove that the whispers weren't useless. They were a gift. He fumbled with his key, his hands shaking so violently it took 3 tries to get it into the lock of their apartment door. He finally shoved it open, the door banging against the stopper with a crash. M.O.M. The apartment was filled with the warm, comforting aroma of frying pork for Katsudan, his favorite. For a split second, the domestic normalcy was so jarring it almost made him stop. But the echo of the burning smell was still fresh in his mind, a venomous undertone to the delicious scent. Inko was standing at the stove, a spatula in one hand, humming a cheerful tune. She was facing away from him, her back to the counter where a large pot of water was boiling furiously for noodles. She was perfectly fine. Relief, so potent it almost made his knees buckle, washed over him. He had made it. He was in time. "Mom, stop!" he screamed, his voice raw with adrenaline and fear. "Get away from the stove. You're going to get hurt." He didn't walk in. He charged. In his frantic haste to get to her, his sneakers skidded on the welcome mat, bunching the small rug into a thick, wrinkled lump just inside the doorway. He didn't notice. His eyes were locked on the boiling pot, the source of the potential danger. His sudden, explosive entrance had the effect of a bomb detonating in the quiet apartment. Inko let out a startled yelp, her cheerful humming cut short. She spun around, her eyes wide with shock at the sight of her son, wild-eyed and screaming in the doorway. "Izuku? Honey, what on earth is—" Her movement was abrupt, a panicked reaction to his panic. As she turned, her slippered foot caught on the very edge of the rug he had just rumpled. It was a small thing. A fatal, tiny detail. Her balance was gone in an instant. She flailed, her arms pinwheeling as she tried to regain her footing. Her free hand, the one not holding the spatula, shot out to brace herself. It slammed directly into the side of the large, heavy pot of boiling water. The world shifted into slow motion. Izuku watched, frozen in a bubble of silent, screaming horror, as the pot tilted. It tipped precariously on the edge of the burner, balanced for a single, eternal second before succumbing to gravity. A shimmering, transparent curtain of water, laced with white noodles, cascaded through the air. It fell directly onto Inko's outstretched right arm. The scream that tore from her throat was not a surprise. He had already heard it. It was the exact same shriek of agony that had echoed in his mind at the construction site. It reverberated through the small kitchen, a sound of pure, unadulterated pain that was now real, tangible, and infinitely worse than the memory. She collapsed to the floor, clutching her arm, her body trembling with shock and pain. The smell of boiling water was quickly replaced by the sickeningly sweet scent of scalded flesh. The blue and white checkered linoleum was splattered with water and noodles. Izuku stood in the doorway, paralyzed. His breath was trapped in his lungs. He looked from his mother's writhing form on the floor to the rumpled rug by his feet. He saw the chain of events with horrifying, crystal clarity. His echo. His panic. His frantic run home. His crashing entrance. The rumpled rug. Her surprise. Her stumble. Her fall. The pot. The burn. He hadn't prevented it. He hadn't just failed to stop it. He had caused it. The echo hadn't been a warning. It had been a script. A script that had accounted for his every action, his every desperate, heroic impulse. His attempt to defy the future was the very mechanism that had locked it into place. She had screamed his name not because he was there to save her, but because his very presence, his very attempt to be a hero, was the catalyst for her agony. A low, keening sound began to fill the apartment, mixing with his mother's pained sobs. It took him a moment to realize it was coming from him. The phantom tingle on his own arm returned, no longer a memory but a sympathetic resonance, a cruel mockery of the real, terrible pain he had inflicted upon the person he loved most in the world. Inko, even through her haze of pain, looked up at him. Her face was pale, streaked with tears, but her eyes were filled not with anger, but with a mother's bottomless well of concern. "Izuku, honey, are you okay? What happened?" He couldn't answer. The words wouldn't form. His mind was a maelstrom of guilt and terror. The bad feelings were no longer just feelings. They were prophecies. Self-fulfilling, ironclad, and cruel. He looked at his own small, trembling hands. The hands that had grabbed the rusty pipe. The hands that had fumbled with the key. The hands of a boy who had tried to be a hero. They were the hands of a monster. A harbinger of doom. Bakugo's words came back to him, no longer a childish insult, but a profound and terrible truth. Useless. He was worse than useless. Useless was passive. Useless was standing by and doing nothing. He had done something. He had acted. He had tried. And in doing so, he had taken a horrible potential future and personally, actively, hammered it into reality. He slowly sank to his knees in the doorway, the tears that had been welling in his eyes finally breaking free, carving hot, silent tracks down his face. They weren't tears of sadness or fear anymore. They were tears of a much deeper, more profound despair. The despair of a 6-year-old boy who had just learned the first, and most important, lesson of his life. His quirk didn't let him see the future so he could change it. It let him see the future so he could understand his own powerlessness. It was a curse designed to show him exactly how and when the people he cared about would suffer, and to ensure he knew, with chilling certainty, that he would be the one holding the hammer, or rumpling the rug, or screaming the words that made it all come true. His quirk wasn't a tool. It was a window, and he was doomed to stand on the wrong side of the glass, watching the inevitable horrors unfold, knowing that any attempt to break it would only leave him bloodied and prove the glass was stronger than he could ever be. He would never be a hero. He was a cosmic joke, a walking, talking tragedy waiting to happen. And this was only the beginning. 8 years. 8 years is a lifetime when you are 14. It is long enough for friendships to fossilize, for dreams to decay, and for a curse to root itself so deeply into your soul that you forget what it was like to live without its thorns. For Izuku Midoriya, the 8 years since the incident in the kitchen, an event he privately called the first lesson, had been a masterclass in fear, avoidance, and the crushing weight of inevitable sorrow. The world was no longer divided into things that were amazing and things that were not. It was now divided into triggers and non-triggers. Triggers were the conduits for his quirk. Strong emotional connections. Unfamiliar objects with a history he couldn't know. Intense physical contact. He learned to navigate his life like a minesweeper, tiptoeing around these potential detonations. He kept his friendships shallow, his interactions brief. He never borrowed a pen if he could help it, never picked up a lost item on the street. He developed a reputation for being skittish and pathologically shy, but it was a carefully constructed armor. A quiet life was a life with fewer echoes, but they still came. The curse was patient. A brush of shoulders in the crowded school hallway brought a flash of a student tripping down the stairs later that day, an accident he failed to prevent because his stammered warning was lost in the din. Gripping his desk during a particularly tense exam gave him a splitting headache, and the sound of the teacher's favorite mug shattering in the lounge 2 hours later. Each one was a small, agonizing confirmation of the first lesson. His knowledge was useless, and his interference was poison. His hero analysis notebooks, once a joyful hobby, became a form of therapy, a desperate intellectual exercise. He didn't just study heroes anymore, he dissected them. He analyzed their quirks, their movements, their support gear, but his focus was always on their results. How did they succeed? How did they avert disaster? He filled page after page with frantic, detailed scribbles, trying to reverse engineer the miracle of heroism, to find a formula that could somehow counteract the cruel equation of his own existence. He studied heroes because he knew, with every fiber of his being, that he could never be one. It was the obsession of a flightless bird cataloging the anatomy of eagles. His relationship with Katsuki Bakugo had curdled from a toxic friendship into a kind of gravitational polarity. Izuku orbited him at a safe distance, a constant, silent reminder of Bakugo's own strength. Bakugo, for his part, seemed to have forgotten the specifics of the construction site incident, but he remembered the result. He saw Izuku's flinching, his muttering, his tear-filled eyes, and saw only weakness. Deku! The useless one. The name had stuck, calcifying into an undeniable truth in everyone's mind, most of all Izuku's. On this particular afternoon, the final one of his junior high career, the air was thick with the promise of the future. His classmates chattered excitedly about their high school applications, most of them for hero courses at lesser-known schools. The teacher, in a fit of performative encouragement, had tossed the application papers into the air. Izuku, of course, had also applied to UA High. It was a masochistic, reflexive act, the last dying twitch of a dream he should have buried 8 years ago. Bakugo's explosive declaration that he, and only he, would be going to UA was expected. His subsequent threat to Izuku, slamming a smoking palm onto his desk, was also part of the familiar, painful routine. "Don't even think of applying, you quirkless wannabe!" Bakugo had snarled, the heat from his hand scorching the wood. Izuku hadn't corrected him. Quirkless was easier. It was cleaner. It didn't begin to touch the horror of the truth. He had simply sat there, had bowed, and taken it. Now, he was walking home, taking the long way under a concrete overpass. The path was deserted, the air cool and shadowed. He scrolled through a hero news site on his phone, a form of self-flagellation. A new hero had debuted, Mount Lady. He watched the clip of her giant form, her flashy powers, her confident smile. She stopped villains. She prevented chaos. She was everything he wasn't. He sighed, a sound heavy with the accumulated weight of 1,000 small surrenders, and slipped his phone into his pocket. He needed to get home. He needed to update notebook number 13. It was the only thing that gave him a semblance of control. He took a step forward, and the world beneath him seemed to lurch. A shadow fell over him, vast and sudden. The smell hit him first, a putrid, gagging stench of raw sewage, stagnant water, and something else, something uniquely foul and organic. He looked up from the ground and his blood ran cold. A manhole cover, just a few feet away, was rattling. From the dark opening oozed a viscous, living mass of green-brown sludge. 2 enormous, malevolent yellow eyes floated in the morass, locking directly onto him. "A medium-sized invisibility cloak!" The sludge gurgled, its voice a wet, disgusting rasp. Perfect. Izuku didn't have time to scream. He didn't have time to run. The sludge lunged, a tidal wave of filth and malice, and enveloped him. It was instant, total sensory deprivation. The cold, thick liquid forced its way into his mouth, his nose, his ears. It was like being drowned and suffocated simultaneously. His lungs burned for air he couldn't get. Panic, primal and absolute, seized him. He thrashed, his limbs meeting only the suffocating resistance of the villain's fluid body. And then, through the terror, the curse activated. It was an echo of his own immediate future. He felt a sudden, profound calm wash over the panic. Not his calm, but the eerie stillness of cessation. He felt the frantic electrical signals in his brain flicker and dim. He heard the thunderous pounding of his own heart slow stutter and then stop. He experienced the final, fizzling out of consciousness, a fade to black that was both terrifying and strangely peaceful. He was feeling his own death, a mere 45 seconds before it was due to happen. So this is it, a detached part of his mind thought. It ends here. In the dark. At least this echo won't hurt anyone else. It was a strange, final, selfish comfort. His curse would die with him. He stopped struggling. His body went limp, accepting the inevitable future he had just been shown. The villain chuckled, a sound that vibrated through the sludge. Good boy. Just relax. It'll only hurt for a minute. Izuku was already gone, drifting in the black, peaceful prelude to his own demise. He was waiting for the end. And then, a new sound ripped through the silence. Texas Smash! The voice was thunder. It was salvation. The pressure of the sludge vanished, blasted away by a hurricane of pure kinetic force. Air, sweet, glorious, life-giving air, rushed back into his lungs. He collapsed onto the concrete, coughing and gasping, his body trembling violently. He looked up, his vision blurry with tears and remnants of sludge. A figure stood silhouetted against the daylight at the end of the tunnel. The silhouette was impossible, impossibly large, impossibly heroic, with 2 distinct tufts of hair like rabbit ears. It was All Might. The number 1 hero was here. He was real. He held 2 large soda bottles, now filled with a swirling green sludge and 2 very panicked-looking eyeballs. All Might. Izuku breathed, the name a prayer. Fear not, citizen! The hero boomed, his signature smile a beacon in the gloom. For I am here! He gave a hearty laugh, striking a pose. Thought I'd lost that slippery devil in the sewers, but it seems you had him cornered. Well done! Izuku's mind was a whirlwind. He'd been saved. He'd felt his own death, and then it had been wrenched away from him by the one person he idolized more than anyone in the world. The shock was so immense, he could barely function. He scrambled for his notebook, his hands shaking too badly to write properly. Please, can you sign? He stammered, holding out the notebook. All Might had already signed it with a flourish. There you go, my boy. Now I must be off to deliver this fellow to the authorities. Stay safe. And with that, All Might crouched, preparing to leap. Panic, colder and sharper than the sludge, cut through Izuku's all. No, wait. I have to ask him. It was a question that had been festering in his heart for 8 years, a question he never dared to ask anyone. If anyone in the world had the answer, it was him. In a moment of sheer, unthinking desperation, Izuku did something he would never have dreamed of doing. He lunged forward and clung to All Might's leg just as the hero launched himself into the sky. The wind was a roaring monster, tearing at his clothes and his face. All Might's surprise was evident. Hey! Let go! I love my fans, but this is too much. If I let go, I'll die. Izuku shrieked, his voice thin against the gale. Oh! Right. They landed clumsily on the roof of a nearby department store. Izuku's legs felt like jelly. He was still trembling, not just from the flight, but from the sheer audacity of what he'd just done. Not a very smart move, young man, All Might said, his tone more concerned than angry. He started to walk toward the edge of the roof. I'll leave you here. Just bang on the door and someone will eventually let you down. I'm out of time, so, wait! Izuku cried out. Suddenly, a cloud of steam erupted from the hero, thick and white. When it cleared, the mountainous figure of All Might was gone. In his place stood a skeletal, emaciated man with sunken blue eyes and a spray of blood coming from his mouth. Izuku stared, his mind refusing to process what he was seeing. An imposter? A trick? The man wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. Not a sight for public eyes, kid, he said, his voice a weary rasp. He sat down heavily against the rooftop railing, gesturing to a horrific, starburst-shaped scar on his side. Got this in a bad fight 5 years back. Pretty nasty, right? I can only do the hero thing for about 3 hours a day now. The world tilted on its axis. All Might, the symbol of peace, the pillar of strength, was broken. He was fragile. He was mortal. The revelation was so profound, so earth-shattering, that it momentarily eclipsed Izuku's own problems. But then, the emaciated hero's words brought it all rushing back. So no. I don't think you can be a hero. The words were spoken quietly, without malice. They were the words of a tired, pragmatic man stating a fact. And they struck Izuku with the force of a physical blow. Pros are always risking their lives. The man who was All Might continued. Some villains just can't be beaten without a quirk. It's not wrong to dream, kid. But you need to be realistic. Izuku's head drooped. His shoulders slumped. A bitter, hollow laugh escaped his lips. Of course. It was the same answer he had always known. The same answer the universe had been screaming at him since he was 6 years old. He heard an explosion in the distance. A flicker of chaos from the city below. All Might cursed, realizing the soda bottles with the villain inside must have fallen during their impromptu flight. But Izuku barely registered it. He was trapped in the cold, gray finality of his shattered dream. He's right. Of course he's right. How could I ever have thought otherwise? He felt a familiar, chilling tingle run up his spine. It was the precursor to an echo. No, not now. Please, not now. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to fight it off, but it was useless. The rooftop faded. He was no longer standing in the wind. He was trapped, suffocating. The thick, cloying smell of sewage filled his nostrils again, but this time it was mixed with the sharp, sugary sweet scent of nitroglycerin. Kakin. He heard muffled, furious explosions, but they were weak, pathetic pops, not the confident blasts he was used to. He felt a terror that was not his own, it was Bakugo's. A primal, desperate fear of drowning, of being erased. He felt the burning in Bakugo's lungs, the frantic, useless struggle. And then he heard a thought, clear as a bell, bleeding through the echo from Bakugo's mind to his. I'm gonna die. The echo released him. He stumbled back, gasping, his hand flying to his own throat. The distant sounds of explosions and sirens suddenly clicked into place. The villain. The one All Might had dropped. It had found a new host. It had found Kakin. And the echo, it wasn't a warning of danger. It was a death sentence. It had the same finality, the same chilling certainty as the echo of his own death just minutes earlier. Kakin wasn't just in trouble, he was dying. Right now. In the next few moments, his struggles would cease, his explosions would fade, and he would be gone. Izuku looked at All Might, who was clutching his side, coughing, unable to transform. He looked towards the pillar of black smoke rising from the shopping district. He saw the future. A future where Bakugo dies, and All Might, the #1 hero, is helpless to stop it. A future cemented by his own foolish actions, by distracting All Might, by making him drop the villain. Another link in the chain. Another tragedy forged by his own hand. The first lesson screamed in his mind. Don't interfere. Interference is the cause. You will only make it worse. He should stay here. He should let the pros handle it. He should accept the inevitable future he had just witnessed. It was the smart thing to do. It was the safe thing to do, but he saw Bakugo's face behind his eyes, contorted in terror. He felt the phantom sensation of his lungs burning. He heard that final, whispered thought, I'm gonna die. His legs moved before his brain could protest. He sprinted for the door to the stairs, ignoring All Might's shocked cry of, Kid, wait! What are you doing? He didn't know. He was just running. He wasn't running to be a hero. He wasn't running with a plan. He was running against the echo. He was running in a blind, idiotic, suicidal rebellion against the future. He couldn't just stand there and watch it happen. He couldn't. After 8 years of passivity, of surrender, some broken, primal part of him refused to be a spectator to this particular horror. He burst out onto the street and ran towards the chaos. The scene was worse than he could have imagined. The sludge villain was larger now, a writhing mass of filth with Bakugo's furious, terrified face trapped within. Bakugo was thrashing, setting off explosions that did nothing but enrage the villain and set fire to the surrounding storefronts. The pro-heroes, Death Arms, Kamui Woods, Backdraft, were all there, but they were helpless. They didn't have the right quirks to handle the situation. They were just holding the perimeter, waiting for Bakugo to die. Izuku saw it all. He saw the weakening of Bakugo's explosions. He saw the growing desperation in his eyes. He saw the hero's powerlessness. The echo was playing out exactly as he had felt it. The clock was ticking, and then, he met Bakugo's eyes. In that single, fleeting moment, he didn't see his bully. He didn't see the arrogant, cruel boy who had made his life a misery. He saw a terrified kid who was about to be snuffed out. And in Bakugo's eyes he saw a plea. A silent, desperate, help me. His feet were moving again, a will of their own. He broke through the police line, ignoring the hero's shouts. What are you doing, you idiot? His brain screamed. You have no quirk. You have no plan. You're going to get yourself killed and change nothing, he knew. But as he ran, his eyes darted around, his analyst's mind taking over on pure instinct. Notebook 13, page 26, the sludge villain. Liquid body, vulnerable in the eyes. He remembered the villain flinching when All Might had appeared. He didn't have a super-powered punch. But he had a backpack. He swung it off his shoulders and hurled it with all his might. The heavy bag flew through the air and struck the villain square in one of its giant yellow eyes. It wasn't much, but it was something. A pencil case spilled out, a hard plastic corner jabbing the sensitive orb. The villain howled, its grip on Bakugo loosening for a fraction of a second. It was enough. Bakugo could finally gasp in a ragged breath of air. Kakin! Izuku screamed, clawing uselessly at the sludge. I couldn't just stand there and watch you die. It was a confession. A confession of his weakness, of his inability to accept his fate. He was clawing at the sludge, but he was really clawing at the walls of the future, trying to leave a single scratch mark on its unbreakable surface. The villain recovered, raising a slimy tendril to swat Izuku away like a fly. You're gonna pay for that, you little brat. This is it. The echo just shifted. Now we both die. The thought was cold and clear. He had interfered. And he had made it worse, but the blow never landed. A massive hand caught the tendril. All Might, in his magnificent, muscle-bound form, stood between them, a shield of hope. He was bleeding from the mouth, his smile strained, but he was there. I really am pathetic, All Might said, his voice quiet but resonating with power. He looked at Izuku, and in his eyes, Izuku saw something that wasn't pity. It was understanding. I told you the traits of a hero, but I wasn't living up to my own ideals. Pros are always risking their lives. That's the true test of a hero. Detroit. Smash! The punch was a symphony of destruction. It atomized the villain, the concussive force so great it changed the weather, causing rain to fall from a clear blue sky. Bakugo was free, collapsing to the ground, gasping. Izuku was blown back, his mind a silent, static-filled void. He had failed. His interference had been pointless. All Might had saved the day, just as he always did. Izuku's mad dash had achieved nothing but getting in the way. He was scolded by the pro-heroes for his recklessness, while Bakugo was praised for his powerful quirk and resilience. It was the same old story. He was still Deku, the useless one. He trudged home, the weight of his failure a physical thing, pressing down on his shoulders, his head, his heart. DKU! He turned. It was Bakugo, running to catch up. For a moment, a foolish flicker of hope ignited in Izuku's chest. Was he going to thank him? Acknowledge what he did. I didn't need you to save me! Bakugo yelled, his face a mask of furious pride. I had it handled. You didn't do anything. You hear me? You're just a quirkless failure. Don't you ever forget it! He turned and stalked off, leaving Izuku alone in the twilight. The flicker of hope died, leaving behind only a cold, familiar ash. Of course. Nothing had changed. I am here! The voice boomed from a side street. All Might, back in his heroic form, dashed out, striking a pose. All Might? What are you doing here? Izuku asked, his voice flat and lifeless. You were swarmed by reporters. Escaping them was a feat in itself. He laughed, then deflated back into his skeletal form with a cloud of steam. He looked at Izuku, his expression serious. Young man. I came here to thank you, and to apologize. And to make a proposition. Izuku just stared at him, numb. What you did back there, it was reckless, foolish, and dangerous. All Might began. But when you, a timid, quirkless-seeming boy, ran into danger while all the top-tier pros, myself included, stood by and did nothing, you spurred me to action. You reminded me what it means to be a hero. He took a step closer, his sunken eyes intense. Most heroes show their true colors early on. Their stories, their legends, they all have one thing in common. Their bodies moved before they had a chance to think. Izuku's hands clenched. He remembered his legs carrying him out of the rooftop door, carrying him towards the villain. His body had moved. But it hadn't been for heroism. It had been a rebellion against his curse. It was different for me. Izuku whispered, the words tearing their way out of him, raw and painful. I'm not quirkless. All Might blinked, surprised. You're not? The dam broke. 8 years of silence, of repressed trauma, of soul-crushing certainty, came pouring out in a torrent of choked sobs and frantic, disjointed sentences. I have a quirk! He cried, tears streaming down his face. The doctor called it inevitable echo. It lets me see the future. But it's not a vision. It's a feeling. A scream, the smell of something burning. The pain of a burn on my mom's arm that I caused because I ran home to stop it. He was gasping for air, pointing at his own arm as if the phantom scar was still there. I felt myself die in that tunnel today. I knew I was going to die. And then I saw Kaken. I felt him suffocating. I felt him dying. I knew it was going to happen. I ran in because I knew. I knew he was going to die, and I thought maybe if I just did something, anything, I could change it. But I can't. I never can. The future is locked. Every time I try to stop it, I just make it happen. My quirk doesn't let me save people, All Might. It just lets me watch them get hurt. It just tells me how I'm going to fail. It's a curse. So tell me, how can someone with a quirk like that, how can I ever be a hero? He collapsed to his knees, his body racked with sobs, the full weight of his confession leaving him utterly empty. He had finally told someone. He had shown the number one hero the rotten, useless core of his being. There was a long silence, broken only by Izuku's ragged breathing. He expected pity. He expected All Might to retract his praise, to walk away from the broken, cursed thing kneeling before him. Instead, he heard a soft sigh. A hand, bony but surprisingly steady, came to rest on his shoulder. "My boy." All Might's voice was gentle, heavy with a dawning, horrified understanding. "You poor child." Izuku looked up. All Might's face was a canvas of conflicting emotions, shock, pity, sorrow, but also an unmistakable flicker of profound respect. "All this time," All Might murmured, looking back in the direction of the fight. "I thought your charge was one of blind, foolish courage. But it wasn't. It was an act of defiance against fate itself. You ran into a battle you knew, with absolute certainty, was a losing one. You fought against a foregone conclusion, to save one person. Even knowing you would fail." He crouched down, meeting Izuku's tear-filled eyes. "I was going to tell you that you could be a hero. Now I see I was wrong." Izuku's heart plummeted. "You already are one, Izuku Midoriya. You have the heart of a hero, shackled to the most tragic quirk I have ever heard of." He stood up, and for a moment he seemed to grow, his skeletal frame imbued with a new purpose. "My quirk is called One for All," he said, his voice gaining strength. "It is a sacred torch, passed down from one generation to the next, a crystallization of power. It is the power to fight back, to save, to win." He looked down at Izuku, and his expression was no longer one of pity, but one of resolve. "Your quirk shows you the inevitable. It shows you the tragedies that cannot be stopped. You are right, a power like that on its own is a terrible curse. But what if you had another power? A power not to change the future, but to endure it? Perhaps you cannot stop the building from collapsing, my boy, but with this power," he held out his hand, "you could be strong enough to hold up the rubble long enough for people to escape. Perhaps you cannot stop the villain from striking the blow, but you could be fast enough to pull the victim away a split second before it lands." The offer hung in the air, shimmering with impossible potential. It wasn't a cure for his curse. It was something else. It was a tool. It wasn't a shield to block the future. It was a set of tools for the aftermath. "Inevitable echo tells you where the disaster will be," All Might said, his voice ringing with a conviction that cut through Izuku's despair. "One for All will give you the power to be there when it happens. You cannot change what is to come. But with this power, you can be there to pick up the pieces. You can mitigate the fallout. You can save those who can be saved within the confines of the tragedy." He saw it then. A new path. A different definition of a hero. Not a hero of prevention, but a hero of damage control. A first responder armed with the most terrible foreknowledge imaginable. The tears were still falling, but for the first time in 8 years, they were not tears of despair. They were tears of a fragile, terrifying, overwhelming hope. He looked at All Might's outstretched hand. He looked at the future, not a blank wall of inevitable pain, but a treacherous landscape he might finally be equipped to navigate. He reached out his own trembling hand and took his hero's. "I'll do it," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I'll do it." The agreement, struck in the fading twilight of a day that had both destroyed and remade him, did not feel like a victory. It felt like a ceasefire. Izuku Midoriya, standing before the skeletal form of his lifelong idol, had not found a cure for his curse, but he had been handed a weapon to fight in a war he thought was already lost. The hope was a fragile, crystalline thing, beautiful but terrifyingly easy to shatter. Their training began 2 days later, at dawn. The location All Might chose was not a state-of-the-art gym or a secluded dojo, but a public disgrace, Dagoba Municipal Beach Park. It was less a beach and more a landfill that had been surrendered to the sea. Years of illegal dumping had turned the once golden sands into a mountain range of rusted appliances, forgotten furniture, and mountains of miscellaneous scrap, all colonized by the relentless tide. The air was thick with the stench of salt, rust, and decay. "Tada!" Tashinori Yagi announced, gesturing with a thin arm at the landscape of ruin. He was in his small form, looking more like a weary scarecrow than the symbol of peace. "Your new gym!" Izuku stared, bewildered. All Might? Why here? Toshinori coughed, a small speck of blood appearing on his lips before he wiped it away. 2 reasons, my boy. First, this place needs cleaning. A hero's first duty, before fighting villains, is public service. This is volunteer work. He grinned, a shadow of his heroic smile. Second, and more importantly, your body is not ready for my quirk. If you were to inherit it now, your limbs would pop right off your torso the first time you tried to use it. Izuku paled, imagining the grisly scene. One for all is a tempest of stockpiled power. Toshinori continued, his tone shifting from cheerful mentor to serious instructor. You need to become a proper vessel to contain it. So, for the next 10 months, until the UA entrance exam, you are going to move all of this. He gestured to the entire beach. Every last scrap. You will build your body from the ground up. It was an impossible task. The sheer volume of junk was staggering. But as Izuku looked at the mountain of trash, he understood. This wasn't just physical training. It was a metaphor. This beach was his own soul, cluttered with the wreckage of his past failures and the decaying monuments of his broken dreams. To clear it was to prepare for a new future. But this is just physical training, Izuku said, a knot of his old anxiety tightening in his stomach. What about my quirk? My echoes? Toshinori's smile softened into something more somber. He walked over to a rusted, half-buried refrigerator and placed a hand on it. That is the other, more difficult part of your training, Izuku. One for all will give you power, yes. But it will not silence the whispers of your own quirk. The causal lock, as you describe it, will still be in effect. The future is still immutable. He looked Izuku dead in the eye, his sunken blue irises holding an intensity that was more powerful than any muscle. Our philosophy, from this moment forward, must change. You have spent your life trying to be a dam, trying to hold back the flood of the future. You have failed every time, because the flood is inevitable. From now on, you will not be a dam, you will be an irrigation channel. Izuku blinked. An irrigation channel? Precisely. You will not try to stop the flood. You will accept that it is coming. Your echoes are your weather forecast. They tell you where the water will rise. Your job, armed with one for all, will be to get there ahead of the torrent and dig channels to divert the worst of the damage. You will guide the destruction away from the most vulnerable points. You cannot stop the tragedy, but you can shepherd people through it. You are not a hero of prevention. You will be a hero of mitigation. A hero of damage control. The concept was radical, terrifying, and yet, it made a strange kind of sense. It didn't fight his curse, it incorporated it. It turned his greatest weakness into a strategic asset. So, how do I practice that? Izuku asked, his voice barely a whisper. By learning control, Toshinori said. He picked up a small, jagged piece of metal. We will start small. I want you to focus. Touch an object. If an echo comes, do not panic. Do not react. I want you to sit with it. Analyze it. Feel the shape of the inevitable event. Then, once you have accepted it, I want you to think. Not how do I stop this, but what can I do within the confines of this event to lessen the harm? This was the core of the American Dream Plan, the ludicrously optimistic name Toshinori had given his training regimen. For 10 months, Izuku's life became a grueling cycle of physical and mental torment. By day, he hauled rusted chassis and waterlogged tatami mats, his muscles screaming in protest. His diet was meticulously planned by Toshinori, his sleep schedule ruthlessly enforced. He grew, his once scrawny frame slowly hardening, calluses forming on his hands, his shoulders broadening. The nights were for the other training. He and Toshinori would sit amidst the junk pile, and Izuku would practice touching things. It was excruciating. Touching a discarded bicycle helmet brought a sharp, fleeting echo of a child's cry and the sting of a skinned elbow, a fall that would happen in the park next week. His first instinct was to find the kid, to warn him, to bubble wrap his entire existence. No! Toshinori's voice would cut through his rising panic. Breathe, my boy. The fall is coming. The knee will be scraped. That is a fact. What can you do? Izuku, his heart hammering, forced himself to think. I could make sure a teacher has a first aid kit nearby. I could be there with a bandage when it happens. Good. Tashinori approved. Not prevention. Preparation. You are preparing for the fallout. It was a constant, uphill battle against 8 years of ingrained instinct. The causal lock remained a cruel warden. One afternoon, while hauling a particularly heavy engine block, Izuku got a sudden, sharp echo of Tashinori, in his small form, tripping over a stray tire and badly twisting his ankle. The pain was sharp, the curse immediate. All Might, watch out for that tire! Izuku yelled, dropping the engine block and rushing over. He kicked the tire out of the way just as Tashinori was about to pass it. For a split second, he felt a surge of triumph. He'd done it, but in his haste to move the tire, he destabilized a precariously balanced pile of scrap metal next to it. With a groan of protesting rust, the pile began to slide. Tashinori, his eyes widening, had to leap backward to avoid being buried under a cascade of rusty sheet metal and pipes. He landed awkwardly, a pained grunt escaping his lips. He hadn't twisted his ankle, but he had pulled a muscle in his back, a far more debilitating injury for his already ravaged body. Izuku stared in horror, the familiar cold dread washing over him. I made it worse, he whispered, his voice trembling. Tashinori, wincing as he straightened up, shook his head. No, my boy. You didn't make it worse. You just changed the details. The event was Tashinori injures himself at the beach today. You interfered, so the universe course-corrected. The future is stubborn. He gave Izuku a pained but reassuring look. This is a good lesson. It proves the theory. Our goal is not to fight the headline, but to edit the article. The 10 months crawled by, each day a new test of his body and his will. He cleared a section of the beach, then another and another. His physical strength grew exponentially, but it was his mental fortitude that underwent the most profound transformation. The echoes still came, but the panic began to recede, replaced by a grim, analytical calm. He learned to treat them not as emotional assaults, but as data points. He was becoming a surgeon of sorrow, learning where to make the incision. Finally, on the morning of the UA entrance exam, it was done. Izuku stood atop the highest mountain of remaining trash, the last truckload waiting to be filled. The sun was rising over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. Below him, for the first time in years, was a vast, clean expanse of golden sand, washed by the gentle morning tide. He screamed. It was a raw, triumphant, cathartic roar that ripped from the very bottom of his soul. It was the scream of a boy who had moved a mountain, both literally and figuratively. Tashinori, in his muscle form, stood on the clean beach below, a proud smile on his face. He held up his phone, showing Izuku a picture he'd taken 10 months ago, a photo of a crying, scrawny boy lost in a sea of garbage. Then he turned the phone around, showing Izuku his reflection now, a strong, determined young man standing tall against the sunrise. You did it, my boy! All Might boomed. You are ready. He plucked a strand of his golden hair. Now, for your reward. He held it out to Izuku. Eat this. Izuku's triumphant moment screeched to a halt. Ha! To inherit my power, you need to ingest some of my DNA. All Might explained, completely straight-faced. It's how it works. After a moment of profound, baffled hesitation, Izuku took the hair and swallowed it. It was anticlimactic, slightly gross, and utterly surreal. He felt nothing. No surge of power, no crackle of energy, just a hair in his stomach. Is that it? It'll take a little while to digest. Now hurry, or you'll be late for the exam. Go, my boy. Go and show them what a hero of the aftermath can do. The auditorium at UA High was vast, modern, and intimidating. Izuku sat amongst hundreds of other hopefuls, a sea of nervous energy and crackling quirks. For the first time, he was willingly placing himself in the one environment he had spent years avoiding, a dense crowd of strangers, each one a potential trigger. It was a nightmare. The moment he sat down, the echoes began. It wasn't a single, clear vision, but a chaotic, disorienting static of future misfortune. A low-grade hum of anxiety filled his mind, punctuated by sharp, jarring bursts. A flicker of pain from a boy 3 rows ahead as his laser quirk backfires. The sharp crackle and the smell of ozone from a girl whose electrical powers soared out at a critical moment. The gut-wrenching feeling of vertigo from a boy with a flight quirk who will misjudge his landing. A girl's quiet sob of frustration as her gear jams. It was a cacophony of future failure, a symphony of small, personal disasters. It was overwhelming, making it hard to focus on the stage where the pro-hero present Mike was delivering a high-energy, deafeningly loud orientation. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut, his hands clenched into fists. Breathe. It's just data. Not your pain. Not your failure. Just data, he repeated Tashinori's mantra, trying to wall off the empathetic bleed-through, trying to turn the screams and sobs into mere information on a spreadsheet. He was so engrossed in his internal struggle that he didn't notice the boy next to him, a tall, serious-looking student with glasses and engine-powered legs, stand up to question Present Mike about the exam handout. He only looked up when the boy turned and pointed a rigid, accusatory finger directly at him. "And you, with the curly hair!" the boy exclaimed, his voice ringing with officious authority. "You have been muttering and fidgeting this entire time. If you are not going to take this seriously, then you should leave. You are distracting those of us who are here to become heroes." The entire auditorium seemed to turn and stare. Izuku's face flushed a brilliant, burning crimson. He wanted the floor to swallow him whole. He tried to stammer an apology, but no words came out. The ordeal was finally over when they were herded towards the massive gates of the practical exam site, a sprawling mock city. As he stood there, his heart hammering with a mixture of terror and anticipation, he saw the girl who had been sitting a few rows away. She had a kind, round face and a warm smile. She came up to him. "He seemed pretty uptight, huh?" she said, her voice cheerful. "I thought all that muttering was great, though. You must be really focused. I'm super nervous." She pumped her fists. "Hope we both do great. Good luck." Her simple, unexpected kindness was a small island of warmth in his sea of anxiety. It was also a mistake. He made eye contact with her, and in that moment of genuine human connection, a new trigger was pulled. His world didn't just flicker this time. A powerful, specific, and terrifying echo tore through him. He was no longer standing at the gate. He was on the ground, his leg trapped, pinned beneath a huge slab of concrete. The taste of dust and blood filled his mouth. A colossal shadow blotted out the sky, a shape of pure, mechanical menace. He felt a wave of absolute, paralyzing terror, not his own, but hers. It was the terror of being small, helpless, and about to be crushed. The echo was so visceral, so complete, that he felt the phantom grinding pressure on his leg, the sharp, radiating pain of a bone about to snap. The echo released him, and he stumbled back, gasping. His own legs were fine, but the memory of the agony was seared into his brain. He looked at the kind girl, Achiko Uraraka, and knew, with the chilling certainty of his curse, what was coming. She was going to be trapped. She was going to be crushed, and it would be by the zero-pointer. The giant arena trap that Present Mike had warned them to avoid. The event was set. The tragedy was written. The gates slammed open. "Gah!" Present Mike's voice roared from the watchtowers. Everyone else sprinted into the city. Izuku hesitated for a single, crucial second. The first lesson was screaming at him. Interference is the cause. But Tashinori's training was a steady counter-rhythm, not prevention. Preparation. He took a deep breath. He couldn't stop the robot. He couldn't stop the rubble from falling. The event was immutable, but he could change her outcome within it. He sprinted into the city. The moment his foot hit the pavement, he felt it. A surge of warmth and power, a crackling, unfamiliar energy flooding his limbs. One for all. It was finally awake. It felt like hooking his nervous system up to a power plant. He saw a one-point robot lurching out of an alley. Without thinking, he punched it. The result was less a punch and more an explosion. The robot's metal chassis crumpled like wet paper, and a shockwave of force blew out the windows of the surrounding buildings. Izuku stared at his arm, which was now throbbing with a deep, searing pain and glowing with an angry red light. It wasn't broken, but it felt dangerously close. Too much power, he realized. He couldn't afford to break his arms on small fry. He needed to be smarter. He began to run, using his enhanced speed and agility to evade robots, his mind racing. He was getting 0 points, but he wasn't here for points. He was on a different mission. He needed to find her. He had to be there when the inevitable happened. He scanned the cityscape, ignoring the smaller skirmishes. He saw explosions in the distance, Bakugo, no doubt. He saw lasers, ice, and a dozen other quirks in action. He also felt the minor echoes he'd sensed earlier play out. A yelp of pain as a boy's quirk backfired. A frustrated cry as a girl's gear jammed. Each one was a small pinprick in his consciousness, a reminder of the futility of it all. He pushed them aside. He had to focus on the major tragedy. Then, the ground began to shake. A deep, groaning sound echoed through the city, and from behind a skyscraper, the 0-pointer rose. It was a titan, a monstrosity of metal and wiring that dwarfed the buildings around it. Its single red eye glowed with menace. The other students, as instructed, began to flee. Panic spread like wildfire. "It's the 0-pointer! Run!" Izuku didn't run away. He ran towards it. He saw her then. Uraraka. She was trying to flee, but she'd stumbled. Her ankle caught on a piece of broken pavement. Just as she fell, a stray blast from another student's fight blew a chunk of facade off a nearby building. A huge slab of concrete crashed down, pinning her leg to the ground. It was happening. Exactly as the echo had shown him. She looked up, her face pale with terror, at the colossal, advancing shadow of the 0-pointer. It raised a gigantic metal fist, preparing to strike the ground right where she lay. This was the moment. The culmination of 10 months of training. Izuku's mind was preternaturally calm. The analytical part of his brain took over, the part honed by Toshinori's harsh lessons. The event, the 0-pointer attacks the spot where Uraraka is. This is immutable. The primary consequence, Uraraka is crushed by either the robot or the falling debris from its impact. The goal, not to stop the robot. Not to fight it. The goal is to remove Uraraka from the equation. The method, one for all. Not as a sledgehammer. As a surgical tool. He didn't pour power into his arms. He focused it all downwards, into his legs. Green, bioelectric lightning crackled around his calves, the sheer energy kicking up dust from the street. "One for all, full cowling!" he screamed, giving a name to the torrent of power. He bent his knees and leaped. The street cracked beneath his feet. He wasn't just jumping. He was launching himself like a missile. He flew through the air, a green blur arcing over the street in a trajectory aimed not at the robot, but at the small, terrified figure on the ground. He was moving so fast the world seemed to slow down. He could see the terror in her eyes, the individual cracks in the concrete pinning her leg, the gargantuan fist of the robot beginning its descent. He landed beside her, the impact cratering the asphalt. He didn't have time to try and lift the slab. He needed to clear the path. Now, he crouched low, aiming not at the rubble on her leg, but at the larger chunks of debris between her and safety. He channeled a tiny, hyper-concentrated sliver of One for All's immense power, not into his fist, but into the tip of his middle finger. It was the ultimate test of control, not a full-body smash, but a pinpoint flick. "Delaware smash!" He flicked his finger. The air itself seemed to shatter. A focused, compressed cannonball of pure force erupted from his fingertip. It wasn't a wide-area blast. It was a surgical strike. The shockwave pulverized the concrete debris in Uraraka's path, blasting it into a cloud of harmless gravel and dust, clearing a perfect escape route. The cost was immediate and agonizing. A wave of blinding pain shot up his arm. His finger broke with an audible snap, turning a sickening purple. 2 more fingers on the same hand fractured from the sheer feedback. But it had worked. "Now!" he yelled, grabbing Uraraka's arm and hauling her out from under the slab of concrete, which was now loose enough to move. He half dragged, half threw her towards the path he had just cleared. He had done it. He hadn't changed the event. The 0-pointer's fist slammed down right where they had been a second ago, the impact shaking the entire city block and sending a tidal wave of shattered asphalt outwards. But he had altered the outcome. He had saved her. This was his first true victory. A victory not against his curse, but within its cruel rules. The elation was short-lived. The force of the robot's impact threw him into the air. He was tumbling, out of control, his broken arm useless, his legs still thrumming with residual power he couldn't manage. The ground rushed up to meet him. Oh, I didn't plan for this part, was his last coherent thought. He was going to die. A new, sudden, and very personal echo confirmed it. The feeling of a sickening, final impact. Then, a light touch. A hand slapped his cheek. Release! A familiar, cheerful voice cried out. The feeling of terminal velocity vanished, replaced by a gentle, weightless floating. He looked down and saw Uraraka, one hand outstretched towards him, her other hand pressed to her stomach, looking ill. She had used her zero-gravity quirk on him, saving him from becoming a smear on the pavement. The buzzer sounded, signaling the end of the exam. The adrenaline vanished, and the pain crashed over him in a tidal wave. Both his legs, overcharged from the jump, shattered. His right arm was a wreck. He was a broken, useless heap, floating gently towards the ground. He lay on the cracked pavement, his body a symphony of agony, looking up at the sky. He had 0 rescue points. He had probably failed the exam. His limbs were broken, but as Uraraka and the other medics, including Recovery Girl, rushed over to him, he wasn't thinking about any of that. A profound, earth-shattering realization settled in his soul, quiet and clear amidst the pain. Tashinori was right. All Might was right. He couldn't stop the storm, but he could be the lighthouse that guided people through it. He couldn't prevent the fall, but he could be there to break it. He couldn't change the unchangeable future, but he could save people. He finally, truly, knew what it meant to be a hero. Not the hero he'd always dreamed of being, but the hero he was born to be. The hero of the aftermath. And as the darkness of unconsciousness claimed him, for the first time in his life, Izuku Midoriya smiled. The letter from Yui arrived a week later. It was an innocuous, cream-colored envelope that felt as heavy as a gravestone in Izuku's trembling hands. He had spent the intervening days in a haze of pain and anxiety, his limbs mending under Recovery Girl's quirk but his mind replaying the exam on an endless, agonizing loop. He had scored 0 villain points. 0. An objective, undeniable failure on the exam's primary metric. His single, desperate act had been a personal victory, a proof of concept for his new philosophy, but by the cold, hard logic of the test, he had failed. He sat at his desk, his mother hovering nervously in the doorway, and opened the envelope. A small metal disc fell out, clattering onto the wood. It sputtered to life, projecting a three-dimensional image of All Might, looking hale and heroic in a sharp yellow suit. I am here! As a projection! The hologram boomed. Izuku flinched. His mother gasped. Young Midoriya! All Might began, his holographic smile beaming. While you may have scored a respectable 0 on the villain portion of the exam, that was only half of the equation. A hero's work is not just about defeating evil. It is also about saving the innocent. The projection shifted, showing a grainy security feed of the exam city. It showed Uraraka, her face earnest, pleading with present might to give some of her points to the boy who had saved her. One examinee's selfless plea was not the only factor. All Might continued, his voice swelling with pride. For there is another, hidden metric. A panel of judges watching for acts of true heroism, we call them. Rescue points. A leaderboard appeared next to All Might's image. Izuku's name was absent from the top ranks. He scanned down, his heart sinking with every name he passed. And then he saw it, near the middle. Izuku Midoriya. Villain points 0. Rescue points 60. 60. It was more than enough. He had passed. The relief was so sudden and so absolute that it felt like a physical blow. He slumped forward, the tension draining out of him in a rush, leaving him limp. Tears welled in his eyes, not of sadness or fear, but of sheer, unadulterated shock. He had done it. He was going to Yue. His mother burst into tears, rushing forward to hug him, her sobs a mixture of pride and relief. Izuku hugged her back, burying his face in her shoulder, the hologram of All Might giving a final, triumphant, "Welcome, young Midoriya. This is your hero academia." Before flickering out, he had made it. The first step on this new, terrifying path was complete. But as he held his crying mother, a cold sliver of his curse intruded on the moment. He was going to Yue, a place teeming with powerful individuals, a crucible where conflicts were forged and disasters were inevitable. The triggers would be everywhere. The weight of his knowledge was about to get so much heavier. The first day at Yue felt like walking into the heart of a thunderstorm. The sheer scale of the building was awe-inspiring, but for Izuku, it was a palace of potential triggers. Every doorknob, every railing, every person he passed was a landmine of future sorrow. He kept his hands balled into fists, his gaze fixed on the floor, trying to minimize contact, trying to keep the whispers at bay. He found Class 1A, the door comically oversized, and slid it open. The first two people he saw sent a jolt of anxiety through him. The serious boy with glasses from the orientation, and Katsuki Bikugo, who was already yelling at him, his feet propped disrespectfully on his desk. "Get your feet off that desk!" The glasses boy, Tenya Ida, commanded. "You are disgracing our upperclassmen and the craftsmen who made it. Like I care, you elite 4-eyed extra!" Bikugo snarled back. "What junior high you from?" Izuku froze in the doorway, caught in the crossfire. He wanted to turn and run, to find a quiet corner to hyperventilate in. But then, a cheerful voice cut through the tension. "It's you! The plain-looking one!" It was Uraraka. She was beaming at him, her cheeks rosy. "I can't believe we're in the same class. That punch you threw was amazing! Bam! Whoosh!" She mimed a wild punch, full of energy. "And then you went all frowny-faced and scary for a second." Izuku's face turned scarlet. He stammered a greeting, his mind a frantic mess. "She's talking to me? Be normal. Don't touch her. Don't make eye contact for too long." He was acutely aware that she was a major trigger, a person he had a powerful, pre-established connection to. Another echo felt imminent. "If you're just here to make friends, then you can pack up your things and leave." A new voice, low and profoundly tired, came from the floor behind Uraraka. A man who looked like a homeless caterpillar lay on the floor in a yellow sleeping bag. He took a long slurp from a juice pouch before unzipping himself and standing up. "It took you all 8 seconds to quiet down. Life is short. You're all too irrational." He introduced himself as Shota Aizawa, their homeroom teacher. His demeanor was one of utter exhaustion, his eyes bloodshot and bored, as if the very concept of teaching heroic teenagers was a Sisyphean task he had long since grown weary of. He tossed the set of blue gym uniforms onto his desk. "Put these on and meet me on the field. We're having a Quirk apprehension test." The locker room was a fresh hell of minor echoes. A misplaced gym bag leading to a future argument. A forgotten towel causing a minor slip. Izuku changed in a corner, his back to the wall, trying to create a small, safe bubble in the chaotic space. He could feel Bakugo's glare on him, a familiar, burning pressure. Bakugo was utterly bewildered by his presence here. To him, Izuku was still the quirkless, useless Deku. His success on the exam was an anomaly, an impossible riddle that grated on Bakugo's black and white view of the world. Out on the field, Aizawa explained the test. They would be performing a series of standard physical assessments, a 50-meter dash, a grip strength test, a long jump, but they were allowed, and expected, to use their quirks. "Bakugo," Aizawa said, his voice flat. "You finished first in the practical exam. What was your best softball throw in junior high?" 67 meters. Bakugo grunted. "Try it with your quirk." Bakugo strode into the throwing circle, a feral grin on his face. He wound up, and with a guttural roar of "Die!" he launched the ball. An explosion propelled it from his palm, sending it soaring through the air on a plume of smoke and fire. Aizawa held up a small device. 705.2 meters. Know your own maximum first. That is the most rational way to form the foundation of a hero. The class erupted in excited murmurs. "This looks so fun!" someone exclaimed. Aizawa's expression soured. "Fun? You think this is fun?" His eyes narrowed, his capture scarf began to float, and his black hair stood on end, revealing a pair of glowing red eyes. "You have 3 years here to become heroes. You think it's all going to be games and fun times? Unbelievable." "Very well," The student who ranks last in total points will be judged to have no potential and will be expelled. Immediately, the excited chatter died, replaced by a thick, anxious silence. Expulsion. On the first day. This wasn't a game. This was a crucible. Izuku felt a wave of cold dread. He hadn't used one for all since the exam. He still had no control over it. A full power activation would break his bones, rendering him useless for the rest of the tests. If he couldn't control it, he would fail. He would be expelled. The dream would be over before it had even begun. The test started. The 50-meter dash. Ida used his engines to clear it in 3.04 seconds. Bakugo used his explosions for 4.13. Uraraka made her clothes and shoes weightless. Izuku, unable to risk one for all, ran it like a normal person, clocking in a pathetic 7.02 seconds. The grip strength test. A large boy with multiple arms, Mizo Shoji, scored 540 kilograms. Izuku managed a meager 56. He was failing. Badly. He watched his classmates use their amazing, versatile quirks. Aoyama's naval laser. Tokoyami's dark shadow. Todoroki's ice. Each one was a testament to a power that could be controlled, honed, and utilized. His own power was a self-destruct button, and his curse was a constant, whispering commentator narrating his impending failure. He's going to rank last, the whispers in his mind seemed to say. He's going to be expelled. All that work for nothing. Finally, it was his turn for the ball throw. This was his last chance. A single, explosive demonstration of power. If he broke his arm here, it wouldn't matter. He just had to get a decent score on this one event. He stepped into the circle, the soft ball feeling alien in his hand. He took a deep breath, trying to channel the memory of his training with all might. Become a proper vessel. Control the tempest. He drew his arm back, focusing the torrent of one for all into it. He could feel the power building, a wild, untamed energy crackling under his skin, ready to tear him apart. Green lightning snaked up his arm. He was about to throw, to sacrifice his arm for a single, good score. 46 meters, Aizawa's bored voice cut through his concentration. The power in his arm vanished. Izuku looked at his hand, then at the ball, which had just dribbled a few feet away from him. I erased your quirk, Aizawa said, his eyes glowing red, his scarf floating menacingly. That entrance exam was certainly not rational. A person like you, who can't control his own power, shouldn't be allowed here. Izuku's blood ran cold. Aizawa knew. He saw right through him. Are you planning on breaking your arm again? Aizawa continued, his voice dangerously low. Planning on having someone else save you every time you use your power? And no! That's not what Aizawa used his scarf to yank Izuku forward, their faces inches apart. That is what you're planning. And the people around you will be forced to bear that burden. In the past, there was a hero who saved over 1,000 people by himself in a single disaster. He was a hero of absurd, reckless passion. You have that same passion. But you have no control. With your current abilities, you are nothing but a liability who will, after breaking a few bones, become a useless doll in need of rescue. Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, striking the core of Izuku's deepest fears. Useless. A liability. In need of rescue. Aizawa had, in a few short sentences, summarized the exact opposite of what he was striving to be. I've returned your quirk, Aizawa said, his eyes returning to normal. You have one more throw. Get it done. He stepped back, leaving Izuku alone in the circle, the weight of the entire world on his shoulders. The eyes of his classmates were on him. Bakugo was smirking, confident that Deku was about to fail spectacularly. Ida and Uraraka looked on with concern. Izuku's mind was a maelstrom. Aizawa was right. He couldn't keep breaking himself. But if he didn't use his quirk, he would be expelled. It was a perfect catch-22. He took a deep breath, clutching the ball. He had to try. He had to prove Aizawa wrong. He had to prove to himself that the last 10 months hadn't been a waste. He gripped the ball tightly, his knuckles white, channeling every ounce of his desperation, his fear, and his sliver of hope into this single, final act. He closed his eyes. Control. Not a sledgehammer. A surgical tool. Mitigation. As he gripped the ball, his thumb pressing hard into the worn leather seam, the echo hit him. It was not a chaotic wave. It was a single, pure, piercing note of agony. A sharp, clear image flashed in his mind, his own index finger, bent at an unnatural angle, swollen and a deep, bruised purple. With the image came the searing, singular pain of a bone snapping cleanly in two. There was no other context. No other sensation. Just the image and the pain of his own, immediate, future injury. He knew, with the absolute certainty of his curse, that if he threw the ball with his full power, his finger would break. The old panic surged, a cold wave threatening to drown him. The first lesson. The causal lock. If he tried to prevent it, would his whole hand shatter instead? If he threw with less power, would he slip and break his ankle? The future was set. His finger was going to break, and then, Toshinori's voice echoed in his memory. Accept that it is coming. The event is immutable. Our goal is not to fight the headline, but to edit the article. The headline was, Izuku breaks his finger throwing the ball. He couldn't change that, but he could use it. His panic receded, replaced by a chilling, razor-sharp focus. He opened his eyes. He knew the point of failure. He knew the exact location of the inevitable injury. The curse had, for the first time, given him a precise target. He drew his arm back. He didn't try to power up his whole arm, a limb that would tear itself apart. He didn't try to prevent the injury. Instead, he accepted it. He embraced it. He channeled the entire, raging tempest of one for all not into his arm, not into his hand, but down to a single, infinitesimally small point, the tip of his index finger. The very bone he knew was doomed to break. He was making it the conduit. The lightning rod. The sacrificial point of failure that would allow the rest of the system to function. Smash! He screamed, the word a release of all his pent-up frustration and resolve. He threw the ball. The power of one for all, concentrated into that single, tiny point, exploded outwards. A colossal shockwave of force ripped through the air, propelling the ball like a cannon shot. It flew with incredible velocity, a white speck disappearing into the sky, leaving a miniature sonic boom in its wake. The pain was immediate and excruciating, exactly as the echo had predicted. A sickening crack echoed in his hand, and a bolt of white-hot agony shot up his arm. He looked down at his index finger. It was broken, swollen, and grotesquely purple. But the rest of his hand, the rest of his arm, was completely unharmed. He had controlled it. He had taken an inevitable injury, and used it as a focusing lens for his power. He had turned the curse into a tool. He turned to face Aizawa, a triumphant, pain-filled grin on his face. Mr. Aizawa, he said through gritted teeth. I can still move. The class was silent, stunned. Bakugo's jaw was on the floor, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and dawning fury. How could Deku, useless, quirkless Deku, possess that kind of monstrous power? Aizawa watched him, his bored expression cracking for just a moment. A slow, feral grin spread across his face. This kid, he muttered under his breath. He held up the device. 705.3 meters. He had beaten Bakugo by 1/10 of a meter. The rest of the tests passed in a blur of pain. Izuku performed poorly, his broken finger a constant, throbbing reminder of his gambit. But it didn't matter. He had done what he needed to do. At the end, Aizawa projected the final rankings. Izuku's name was at the bottom. 20th place. Dead last. The cold dread returned. He had done his best, but it wasn't enough. He was going to be expelled. By the way, Aizawa said, his voice dripping with casual cruelty as he erased the leaderboard. That whole expulsion thing was a lie. The class stared, dumbfounded. It was a rational deception, Aizawa explained with a shrug. To draw out the upper limits of your quirks. Izuku, Uraraka, and Ida screamed in unison. A girl with a black ponytail, Momo Yayorozu, sighed. Of course it was a lie. It should have been obvious. Izuku felt like he was going to pass out from the sheer emotional whiplash. He wasn't expelled. He was safe. As they headed back to the locker room, Aizawa handed him a slip. Go see Recovery Girl. Get that finger fixed. In the infirmary, Recovery Girl healed his finger with a kiss, the process draining his stamina and leaving him feeling woozy. She chastised him for his recklessness, a lecture he was already becoming familiar with. He walked out of the school gates at the end of the day, exhausted but alive. He had survived. He had found a new way to use his power, a new way to interact with his curse. He felt a sliver of pride, of accomplishment. He saw Ida and Uraraka waiting for him. They praised his throw, their concern genuine. For the first time, he felt like he might actually be able to make friends here. As they walked towards the station, he allowed himself a small, private smile. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad. And then he saw Bakugo. He was standing there, his school bag slung over his shoulder, his expression thunderous. He looked like a volcano about to erupt. Deku! He growled, his voice low and dangerous. Izuku froze. Uraraka and Ida stopped a few paces behind him. What was that? Bakugo demanded, stalking towards him. Explain yourself. Now. You've been hiding that quirk from me all these years, haven't you? You've been laughing at me behind my back, looking down on me this whole time. And no, Kaken, you've got it all wrong. Izuku stammered, holding up his hands defensively. My quirk, it's not what you think. It's something I just got, it's borrowed, it's complicated. The half-truths tumbled out, a panicked, clumsy attempt to explain the unexplainable without revealing the secret of One for All. But Bakugo wasn't listening. He was trapped in the whirlwind of his own shattered pride. The idea that Izuku, the pebble he had spent his entire life kicking around, was secretly a mountain was an existential threat to his entire worldview. Borrowed? Bakugo spat, his palms starting to smoke. Don't lie to me! You made a fool out of me today, Deku! And I'm going to make you pay, he lunged. But before he could land a blow, a familiar voice cut through the air. That's enough. All Might, in his hero form, suddenly appeared, jogging past them as if on a casual run. Just because we're not on campus doesn't mean you're not my students. Young Bakugo, control yourself. Young Midoriya, I expect better than to provoke him. He gave them a stern look before jogging off, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. Bakugo stood there, trembling with rage, his attack thwarted. He shot Izuku one last look of pure, unadulterated hatred. This isn't over, he hissed, before turning and storming away. Izuku was left shaking, the brief warmth of his new friendships forgotten, replaced by the cold, familiar fear of Bakugo's rage. The weight of his secrets, the weight of his curse, the weight of One for All. It was all pressing down on him again. He looked at his hand, the finger now healed but still aching with a phantom pain. He had passed the first test. He had found a way to turn his curse from a simple warning into a strategic tool, but it had come at a cost. He had revealed a sliver of his power, and in doing so, had enraged the one person whose future was most dangerously intertwined with his own. The whispers would only get louder from here. And the consequences, he knew with a chilling certainty, would be far greater than a broken finger.